So we are here today to talk about how Link has transformed into a data-driven organization, not just by investing in tech, but by reshaping the culture and the processes and the decision-making across the firm. I wanted to ask you guys first and foremost, why do we do this? And then the second part of that question is, how do we do it?
Sure. Why don't I start? From the why perspective, when people ask me this question, I think there's a presumption that we started with some kind of a grand vision, that we knew what point A was, B, C, D, and we want to end it up at point Z. And in reality, that is not how things actually worked. What we started the process doing was trying to solve a very simple problem, which is how do we answer very simple questions about our company? We started operating this company at an enormous scale. It was acquired very, very quickly. And so there were thousands of properties, thousands of units, thousands of customers. And answering a simple question like, what is the occupancy of the portfolio today,
Right.
was something that was it would take us oftentimes days to answer very simple questions like that. And so it really was a product of necessity. As we came in, we have an owner that demands a lot of information and demands it quickly, rightfully so. And in order to be able to supply that information, we realized all across the company that very simple things were being done repeatedly. Definitions varied from department to department to department. People all across the company were being asked the same question and they were producing different answers. And so really this came down to, at the beginning, an idea of using our scale, harmonizing what we're doing and being consistent, providing consistent information at the tip of a fingertip for people, and with a consistency and a quality that was kind of, unquestionable. I would say, and Clark can chime in, as we started to go down this road, it became very clear very quickly, at least for me, what the potential of this was. And so once we started solving very simple problems, we realized that you could use a tech platform, you could use good data processes to answer not just very simple questions, but much, much more sophisticated ones. And I think when management and Luke and other people in the senior team realized that we could answer more sophisticated questions, we started to realize, wow, this could be a differentiator for the company.
Very powerful. Yeah.
Very much so, very much so.
From my perspective, it was an opportunity, a greenfield. So he was just trying to solve business problems, to answer simple questions, but I thought about it a little bit broader with respect to if we get it right, we could build an ecosystem of data and technology that then can kind of feed on itself. Store once, serve many. I envisioned it as seeing a way to inform our applications, our dashboards, and then our employees can take a look at the information with trust and confidence that it's going to make sense to them when they consume it, whatever the channel is. That was 3 years down the road from where Matt is starting, but I was already kind of envisioning that if we got it right, what it could turn into. And luckily, or fortunately, we had a chance to get to that place, I think.
And I think this is a case study in the right vision from technology being done in a very collaborative way with senior business leaders.
That's why a little bit of it was luck, like just the special circumstances that afforded us the ability to do this in the way that we did it. It just came together in the right way. And we made mistakes along the way for sure, and learned, but it wouldn't even been able to get started without the need that he had, and then I think the support from the broader executive team in Blackstone, and then probably a bit of my experience of how I've seen this done incorrectly in the past and where it's failed, and our unique opportunity to do it from scratch from the beginning.
And I would say, as we got, we started with this very simple thing of answering basic questions about the company. I think that vision, as I mentioned, it started to evolve. We're not just trying to automate processes and lower our G&A, though we do that. We're really trying to push the boundaries of what data can be used in terms of providing insights and better decisions for the company. And that happened, I think, very, very early on. And really the end product of that was us deciding that we should come up with the key questions we want to answer as a company. We had answered some of the very basic leasing volumes, occupancy, CapEx, all those basic, those basic terms and those basic questions you have to answer as a company. We then went to that next level of What are the predictive questions we want? When is a building going to break? When is a customer going to leave? What is the direction of a rent in a given market? How long should it take us to do all these different things? Those more sophisticated questions really started to bubble up, and we created a much more systematic approach to that. We created a list of the 50 questions and used them and started to build business plans around them. The how, from my perspective, really began at that very, very basic level. We said we want to know quickly 10 or 15 different things about the company, but then we realized that different people were calculating those things in different ways, in very painstaking, labor-intensive ways all across the company. And so senior leaders pulled back, and so we as a senior group pulled back and said, this doesn't start with tech, this doesn't start with spreadsheets, this doesn't start with data per se.
Right.
It starts with understanding your business, right? And coming up with a vernacular, with a taxonomy that we can all agree on. So that was the genesis of the business glossary, right? And what we realized very quickly was that the business glossary would contain hundreds of terms ultimately. But I would say, for everyone listening to this, I would say that's the most important piece of this, is you've got to start at the beginning. People will sell you a great tech platform, or they will sell you great visualizations, lots of very, very expensive tools. Those things, I think, come much more at the end than they do at the beginning. So we started with this process of define your terms, agree on them all across the business, which is a process all by itself. And then you need to decide in those terms, how do we get to, we may say we want it to be defined in a certain way, how do we make sure the whole firm defines it that way? And that is leading to a huge amount of process change all across the company. But maybe, Clark, maybe you can chime in. The glossary isn't just, okay, start at term number 1 and work your way down, although you can do that. I think Clark really helped us to organize that exercise because it can be quite unwieldy.
What was the show on Discovery Channel? Dirty Jobs? I don't know if it was Discovery Channel, but Dirty Jobs.
Yeah.
And this is the dirty work. This is the hard work to get the people to align on what the information means, what the definition is. The technology is easy. I say that all the time. It's binary. It's pretty, it's pretty straightforward. But getting, as Matt says, the pesky humans to align and agree is the challenging part. And we did it through, sometimes you have to push dictatorially that down, but we had such both a bottoms up and a downward trajectory of that demand to understand this and define it the right way. Then it sort of just took on a life of its own. Every business leader then understood their area or domain of expertise, and they knew that we were coming for them to say, hey, we need you to define your space COO or CFO. And so we broke it down into 4 domains of information. This works for real estate at least. We started with financial information, which was Matt's initial point around we needed to understand how the company's operating day in and day out. But in real estate, financial information isn't just the accounting, it's also mapping that to the assets and then tying that back. And so it's a little bit more complicated than that in our unique industry that we're in. So we figured out the financial information. The next year we moved on to property information, right? And that's about understanding, as an example, you would think, oh geez, a parking spot's a parking spot.
Right.
No, well, a parking spot is a parking spot, but how many parking spots in your 4,000 assets do you have, right? Or take something like clear height. How much do we debate the definition of freaking clear height? Clear height in our world of warehouses.
The middle of the building.
Yeah, is it from here to the light? Is it from here to the the rafters? And making sure you do that correctly across all of your properties and defining what that means.
Consistently too, yeah.
Exactly. And so as we started to do this, we did 4 domains overall. I was able to do something that I think a lot of other data and technology folks weren't able to do, which is actually create a digital twin of our organization. So take the physical assets and create a digital twin of those assets. And I'm not just talking about photography and drone videos, which we did, but there's 280 data points we capture across each property or asset.
Wow.
I talked about parking spaces, clear height, dock doors, you name it, we cataloged it consistently, we defined it, then we inventoried it and cataloged it, and now we keep that current every day across our entire asset portfolio. And it's a hugely beneficial thing to have. So we did financial, we did property, we had to do leasing, which is really our kind of point of sale, how we capture revenue, how we manage our pipeline, how we know, how much revenue we're making and when leases are coming up for renewal or if we have empty spaces or dark spaces. And just now we're moving into customer, which is a whole nother realm of how you gather intelligence around the customers that are in your building as well as the prospects who might be interested in joining your portfolio. And again, the first 3 are in a really good place, I'd say. The 4th one we're just starting to capture. But if you get all four of those humming in rhythm, it really creates an amount of data exhaust and insights that really changes it for us in the end, in terms of like our differentiation.
And this really is both a step-by-step process. You're summarizing it very nicely, but this took us months and years to do this stuff. And it's not something you can just do to people, right? I would think, one of the phrases I always use is data is not data, data is process. And so if you don't have the right processes behind this stuff, you're going to end up with bad data. And if you have bad data, you can generate no good insights. I would say one of the advantages we had, and I think most real estate companies will find, if you want to define something differently, you have to go all the way through the process that creates that data and get those people to change what they're doing. And no one likes change. People want to keep doing things the way they're doing it. But if you explain to people why you are doing this, oftentimes you get a huge amount of buy-in. People want consistency across the organization. And to this day, we have a team of people who focus on filling so-called data gaps, right? It is a thing, and it's all about going through the organization and figuring out who needs to change what in what they're doing to get the data that we need to generate better insights.
And we had to create, I'm going to get into this now, the Data Governance Committee, which is all the things Matt just said. We had to go define, change the process to collect, but we also have to manage it. And so how do you do that from the beginning to the end? And part of defining it was to set up a group of business leaders across the entire organization. And in the past where I have seen this fail, but where it succeeded here at Link, in the past it would be left on my desk to do. And as the CTO or CIO, I'd have to go figure this out and get everyone together, herd all the cats, and no one wants to do it. No one's really vested in it. It's like, why do I have to come to this meeting every week? Instead, it came from every one of the leaders at Link saying that this is important. And every one of those leaders sent delegates, or they themselves went to this meeting. First, it was weekly for an hour, maybe an hour and a half. Now it's every other week for an hour. Sometimes we cancel it if we don't have anything to talk about. But every one of the data definitions went through there. And so there was probably 25 representatives from different departments at Link.
Right.
They all agreed, they all debated, they all signed off. And now, going forward, anytime a definition needs to be changed, it has to go through that process for sign off and review. If we introduce a new data element or if we deprecate a data element, it goes through that same process. That was very hard early on to get vetted down. Now it's sort of like breathing,
Yes.
I think.
Rewinding all the way back, we didn't have someone whose job it was. We now have a person who chairs the Data Governance Council. There's a huge amount of work that goes along with managing all of our data, all of our definitions, and making sure that data quality is there. People hate, rightly so, they hate bureaucracy, and this on paper looks like bureaucracy, but it is so enthusiastically bought into at the firm, and I think that's because people understand what purpose it serves, that it ends up saving us huge amounts of time. We don't waste lots of time fixing things over and over and over again.
We know we had to build an infrastructure to support storing this information and organizing it and curating it and serving it up to applications. And we went with standard, best-in-class technology partners to do that. We didn't try to create this stuff from scratch. And it was really important for us to go with partners that we knew we could trust that would be in it for the long haul and provide value add to us. The one area where I will say that we did lean into and felt like we needed to differentiate is integration services. If you can imagine a data platform where you're creating some information within your organization, you're probably integrating that with other applications that you have to bring that information together to make sense of it.
Right.
We also have a lot of third parties that we work with, data subscription providers in the real estate world, vendors that we want to work with and get their information in. And so you have to have the technical capability to be able to integrate. And in real estate, it's more challenging than other industries because we're a little bit behind. You can buy a third-party tool like a MuleSoft from Salesforce or a Informatica to be your pipeline integration tool, but you can also engineer one on your own so that you can handle everything and anything outside of what they could do, like plug and play. And we do both. We have a standard platform that we use, but we also had to build something unique to Link to facilitate data coming in, transforming that information, landing it in our data platform the way we wanted to be able to land it. And then one final bit on the technology is we put a set of custom APIs on top so that when we develop applications or dashboards, we can consume the information consistently in repeatable patterns, or we can send that information outbound in a way that our vendors and partners need to see that.
But what we're talking about is we needed to create a single source of truth. People talk about data platform, they talk about data lake. There's a lot of technical terms for this, but what we're really talking about is technology that enables you to take all of your data from all kinds of different sources, whether it's internal or external, vendors or collaborators, and put it all into one place in a way that everyone can access using, pretty well standardized tools. And they can access it knowing that it's accurate, right? So you need this single source of truth, and it needs to be truth. It needs to be accurate. And there's a bunch of steps we can talk about that you also need to take to make sure that what you're putting on the platform in the lake is good data. It has to be cleaned, it has to be scrubbed, it has to be there in exactly the right way, or people will learn that the platform exists, but it produces information that's not reliable. So all of the stuff you talked about was really the steps we took to create this data platform that everyone uses, that all of our tools end up using. And we can kind of walk into, okay, once we created the definitions, we then start to feed the platform with the correctly defined data in a high quality manner. Then what do we do with the data, right? But again, this gets to people start with, hey, I want to use a data visualization tool. I want a great dashboard that everybody can use, rather than backing up all the steps they need to take and saying, what do I have to do in order to be able to get to that? Is the end point. That's the destination in a lot of ways. That is not the start of the story, right? The visualization.
And because Link was a brand new company in 2019, grew very quickly through acquisition with thousands of assets and tens of millions of square feet, hundreds of millions of square feet under management, we wanted to be able to build something that then would obviously grow over time. But we also were putting in not just the enterprise data platform, but we're also putting in, which system of truth is the term to use. We all trust it's a system of truth. But at the same time, in parallel, we're putting in systems of record, which are the applications that we're using to run our business. And we're bringing these in.
Like Yardi.
Like Yardi, like a Blackline or an Anaplan for budgeting. It all has to be architected in a certain way and orchestrated in a way so that you don't step on each other, you don't have things trying to vie for serving up the same information. And again, back to the fortunate position that we were in, we didn't have a lot of legacy tech debt, if any. We didn't have organizational debt. We didn't have operating model debt to deal with. What we had was a different set of stresses, which is this open space that we got a chance to fill in and figure out along the way, but that comes with a different level of stresses that you have to figure out.
No, and in a way, we had some chaos at the beginning because we didn't have anything really.
Yeah.
That was a huge disadvantage at the beginning because we couldn't answer those very basic questions. That was a big disadvantage in a way, but to your point, it's also a huge advantage. A lot of what people watching this are going to be dealing with is so-called technical debt. I have an existing system that I've invested X million dollars in, and unfortunately that system doesn't allow you to do the things we're doing here very easily. Do I try to adapt it? Do I wipe the slate clean and install a new system? That's a lot of cost, that's a lot of time and energy by the organization. So those are all really, really important questions. I think speaking from my perspective, the destination here is so incredibly valuable. It is worth millions of dollars of investment to get there, but we should be clear, particularly for companies starting with a legacy platform, both from a property perspective and a technology perspective, there are some real barriers to doing this, and there's some real costs to replacing one thing for another or adapting it and making it all work together.
And it's really paying off now, not just paying off for Link and the intelligence that it's driving and the insights, and that space has opened up for us, but selfishly in the technology area and the data management area, because we've done such a good job building the enterprise data warehouse, the system of truth, we've surrounded it now with custom applications or applications that you buy in the market, and we're feeding those applications with the exact same data in the same way. And what I mean by that as an example, this is why it's a cost winner for us. We have our online availabilities website, linklogistics.com. If you go to linklogistics.com and search for a property for Link and one of our availability units, the pictures you look at, the drone videos you view, the data you see around the number of dock doors and the parking spots, that's the same information that's being served to our internal facing application called Property IQ, which our asset management team uses to understand what's happening on the ground on the assets.
To actually run the business.
To run the business.
And that's the definition of single source of truth, right?
Traditionally, what you'd see in organizations is that property search application would have its own database, curated separately, trying to keep in sync with everything else manually, and the Property IQ would have its own, same thing, trying to do it all manually and keep it in sync. We don't have those challenges right now or problems. We're able to do it confidently in one place, and I can send it anywhere I need to, and it doesn't cost me anything more or less to do that.
But we should talk about the journey on the way to getting there was very uncomfortable because while you're doing your definitions, you're setting all this up, you still have to keep doing all of your same reporting, right? And so we lived in this world of dual systems for a period of time. I would say for over a year, maybe even still today, we have shadow technology out there, right? Where people instinctively, they just want to go and solve the problem themselves. This is really about building a culture around that. One of the ways we tried to get over that problem was we said, okay, since spreadsheets are very democratic and very federated, we'll allow each team to develop their own dashboards, right?
Using the same data source that
Right.
we've curated and qualified and everyone trusts and love. And so we
Source
thought,
of
that,
truth.
what's the harm in this? This seems like a great
that
idea.
was the idea, was since we're all going to use the source of truth,
Yeah.
and since the platform does calculate certain things, we'll just make it easy for everyone to do what they want to do. We were, I would say, safe to say, maybe you, others warned us that this was not altogether the safest approach.
A little skeptical.
A little skeptical. I've seen that get out of control quickly.
Yes, well, and to that point, it got out of control quickly, right? And what we realized was that we were wasting money, and dashboards, particularly when they require engineering on the data platform, some of them do require that, they can be quite expensive. They can be $100,000 to create if you're not careful. And what we realized was we were starting to create, at best, we were creating duplicative dashboards where one team and another team were basically starting to do the same thing, and we discovered duplicative dashboards. We also very quickly ended up in a place where we didn't even know what dashboards we had, right? And so I would say, some of these things we had to learn many times over. This one we learned pretty quickly, and within 6 months or so, we all said this is not working the right way. We're going to create a centralized team, a centralized resource to create these for us. And that is just a quantum leap for people, right? No one has to wait in a queue to create a spreadsheet.
Right.
In this case, in some cases, they had to wait in a queue to get their dashboard. It was very, very important that we resource that team appropriately and have senior management chime in on what the prioritization of their work was. So you want to have enough people on there that you can do a lot of work quickly, because if people are waiting, back comes the shadow tech, right? And then we want to make sure that we knew, even if we had a lot of people, it was going to be a finite resource. We had to make sure we were prioritizing that work correctly. In that process, we created what we refer to as our enterprise reporting library. It's a list of now, I think, 20 to 30 dashboards that we have that are now listed on the intranet that everyone knows exist, knows what they can do. They're all described on the intranet. So if you want to know historical leasing data, there's one dashboard that you're going to, not somebody else's spreadsheet or somebody else's dashboard. There's one place. So it's not just a single source of truth on data, it's a single source of truth on reporting. You're trying to really create both of those things.
What we also found when we tried to federate the dashboard creation and management, to kind of put it in the hands of the people, is that became the individuals felt like their value was to create the world's most coolest dashboard ever, and we didn't want people spending time on that. We wanted people spending time on understanding the data so that they can run their business, not creating the views to this. And it became almost like a nuclear arms race between different business units, and everyone. Then you can imagine jobs were being repurposed to be creating dashboards. There's the open recs, or we need more employees to do this. And we're like, wait, this is really going in the wrong direction. And so, to Matt's point, we centralized it. We put some structure around work intake and demand management, and as a result,
You're never done building dashboards, but you're done building the most critical ones.
Yeah.
And I think that was a key success indicator. Really understanding how to present and communicate data is really important. At the beginning, to your point, we had people creating dashboards just because they could create cool looking dashboards. And what we realized very early on was, don't create a dashboard unless you can make a list of the 5 or 10 questions you are trying to answer. And I would say that, if you adopt an insights-driven strategy like us, I think a lot of that strategy, a lot of the tactics around the strategy really come down to what questions, really driving all the time towards that. What questions are we trying to answer, and in what order, and to what end, right? So everything revolves around these questions, and then of course, designing them in a way that any normal person can actually use them, even if they weren't the one who designed them themselves.
The amount of times I've heard Matt ask the question, rightly so, when we're reviewing sort of a problem to solve or a dashboard process request, he's like, oh, just stop. What question are you trying to answer before we go any further?
Yeah.
And it's amazing how convoluted an idea can get without actually understanding what question they're trying to answer. But once you ask that, they pause and like, okay, let's think this through, and then it becomes a very simple, in many cases, a simple task to answer it.
You can start a data-driven process for an end of creating more efficiency. That's really not what our purpose was. Our purpose was really about providing insights. And if you're going to go down that road and you're looking for that very first step, I think to kind of create a sense of interest and curiosity and intrigue in a senior management team, it's starting with the question, what questions would we like to be able to answer as a business? Right. Can we come up with the 30 questions? If we can answer those questions really well, we will have a competitive advantage versus our peers. That's really the perspective that we took. It wasn't at the very beginning. We started, like I said, in this very organic, trying to do very simple things. But as the strategy evolved, that's what we keep coming back to over and over again. It's our kind of North Star from a data perspective is, what are the 30 questions we're trying to answer as a company?
And now what we do with dashboards is we almost use them as a prototyping tool to answer questions in a lightweight design kind of way with the real data to maybe inform whether it could become an application someday or a request to enhance an existing application, which obviously takes a little bit more lift in engineering to get that done. I think that's been pretty effective for prototyping business plans and other various requests that have come through, and without kind of boiling the ocean, we can get something stood up quickly, get a reaction, iterate on it. And sometimes, actually in many cases, it actually just stays in that format because it's good enough. And sometimes it does traverse into something more complex or long-term, but it's been a really, really powerful tool. I think I talked about the application suites that we're able to empower with the data, common set of data, informing all those applications. By the way, when you're in my job, the death of any app is not the user experience being crappy, it's someone going into that application and the data being wrong. They won't go back. It's over, game over, you won't recover. And so we weren't even able to think about developing custom applications until we were about 3 years into this because we needed to make sure the data was right, and I didn't want to create those data islands. Right. So enough about apps. The other part that we worked on was Matt had this vision for having a team at Link, a business-driven team of researchers, data scientists, if you will, to now take the information that we're starting to capture to then turn it into predictive insights going forward. So we got really good at looking at the past, right? And even current, pretty much. But we really wanted to talk about where is our business headed, where are leases headed, where are valuations headed. And so we had to build a function in and of itself and hire experts who've done this in other industries, adjacent industries, which Matt can probably explain the logic behind that, which I think was brilliant. And then we had to empower them with data scientists to be able to wrangle the data in a way that they needed, and then also give them access to our information in a way that empowers them to be able to do these different models in different ways. And that turned into something that we call Olinda. You want to color commentate on that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I think you're exactly right. It's one thing. It was hard enough just to say, where are we today? What is our occupancy today? Or what was it over the last 3 years? It's another, when we start talking about what are the key questions we want to answer, what is the direction of rent growth? Which markets are going to have the most rent growth? Which assets are going to have the best rent growth? If you can answer that one question for a given asset, that helps you enormously in deciding whether you want to buy that asset or a different asset. But that's about predicting the future, which is not an easy thing, and we should be clear it cannot be done correctly, right? We never had any illusion that we would be able to predict the future with precision. All we were trying to do was come up with a group of people who could help us kind of narrow that cone of uncertainty by using more objective measures and more objective methodology, oftentimes based on historical data, looking at those historical trends and trying to extrapolate them better into the future. That is a very, very data-intensive process. As we all know, AI is supercharging the models to do things like that. We've been using machine learning, which I would say even predates some of the AI that we see today.
Old school AI.
But the bottom line is the fuel for that process is data, right? And it's data on a scale that we didn't see in this organization before, right? We have 3,000, 4,000 assets, 20,000 different leases, whatever it is. That's on a very different scale. The models that we have now are using billions of data points, right? And again, good luck doing that on an Excel spreadsheet, right? You've outgrown the traditional world.
I have a question for you, so I don't know the story on this. What was the impetus of the research function? Where did you get that? You started this story like, wow, we just wanted to do financials and leasing, yes. And then it turned, not quickly, but over time, you're like, wait a second. And then it turned into the research idea, hiring a team. How did that happen?
I think really this gets to the core of the culture of the company and the senior management team, which is, when most companies, real estate companies, are trying to predict the future, they are simply looking at projections from third-party sources. And those sources do a very good job, but if you're using the same projections that everybody else is using. And by the way, historically, you look at trying to, fit these to the history. A lot of times the models are wrong, right? And so we thought they could be improved upon. But we had no competitive edge using the same third-party data that everyone else was using. So we thought there was room to take a different approach to doing predictions than the third parties are doing. And we thought, well, gosh, if we can have this ourselves. And the third piece was we had the appetite for that, and we realized we were on a platform that's 70, 80, 90 billion dollars of size. We now have the scale. This is not a cheap undertaking. But I think we all believe that scale was going to become increasingly important in real estate. And one of the benefits of scale is allowing you to do these expensive activities that can really, really inform the business, right? That can really, again, getting back to that, what questions are we trying to answer? How do we make better decisions? And so it was really about, gosh, all of us sitting around going, there's got to be a better way. And I remember a meeting. We sat down with folks at Blackstone and within our own company. We said, what's the first thing we want to work on? And it was, well, if you could predict one thing, let's predict rents, right? Let's focus on that. And that led to a chain of events where we actually brought in Matt Rand and our current research team to focus on that issue very, very specifically.
So if you think about it from just the power of the platform and the exponential growth that it can provide us, we were just trying to solve a very basic problem in the beginning. And as we started to build this thing, it started to inform our application strategy. It started to inform our data information collection and consumption strategy with Power BI. Now it's started to have splinters into predictive analytics. It all comes from the same data platform. And if we didn't do it that way, it would be exponentially more difficult and expensive to pull off. But because we were able to do it in a way that started with the data governance, has a single place to store the information, it's curated on a regular basis, and we have the integration services wrapped around it that we can feed information in and out very easily and repeatedly, it just creates this, I don't want to say flywheel-like velocity of ability to adopt new things and try new things for lower cost in the end, I think. And doing each of those independently.
For sure. And providing insights just leads to demand for more insights. That's been my experience. It's very few humans that when they get a little taste of what this can do, they don't say, oh, can you do this, this, and this for me as well? And I think that's really, we should also say, we made enormous mistakes along the way, right? We're making this kind of sound like a very linear process. There was a lot of trial and error here, and Matt Rand can tell you specifically, when we started to build his kind of research platform on the data platform, we kind of didn't know exactly what we were doing. We made a bunch of mistakes, and even today, we're kind of going through the process of re-engineering their pipeline process, re-engineering their architecture to make sure that it works as efficiently as possible. And so I'm saying that, in a modesty sense, but also you have to have an appetite for trial and error in this business. We wasted, at the end of the day, we wasted real money along the way here, but the only way to get to where we are now, I personally believe, was to waste some of that money. And along the way, we were modest and humble enough to say we want to bring in as many outsiders as we can, and we did that, a lot with Clark's help. But even with those outsiders, we're trying to do things that haven't been done in this industry before, and you waste money, you waste time, you waste energy, people get frustrated. But I think if you have an appetite for that kind of entrepreneurial culture and entrepreneurial behavior, you can get to a much better place.
How did you get Blackstone to agree or to be comfortable wasting money on this?
Blackstone has their own, as you can imagine, incredibly sophisticated group of data scientists, engineers, technologists, and Clark, you can chime in and maybe describe a little bit more, but everything we've done with them in lockstep along the way. I think there's some things they've done before us, there's some things we've done before them. It's been a very, very collaborative process, but there's no way we would have the budget to do these things without absolutely taking them along for the ride in the process. And I will credit them. One of the reasons why I came to this company was Blackstone has this reputation for wanting to answer hard questions in a different way. That, for an analytical person, for somebody who's trying to think about the company of the future, that's kind of music to one's ears. And so a lot of us came here because we were big enough to spend some money, and we had a sponsor who saw the potential in this and really wanted to spend the money and partner along with us. And I think we've gotten stuff from each other along the way here.
We have. I think we've built credibility that when we pitch an idea, we follow through on the execution. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't, but I think in the main we've gotten it right more often than not, which
Absolutely.
Shows the value. And then I think from Blackstone's perspective, they like the fact that we can be sort of the little engine that can in our asset class. and turn us loose, because we are the experts in this particular asset class more than any other entity at Blackstone right now. They have the asset management team, of course, as well, but they know that we can do it a little bit more of a, it's going to be an oxymoronic statement, a myopically scaled way, because we're focusing just on industrial, just in the US, just in this particular space, and we're going to be throwing some really, really smart people at these questions and see what we can come up with. And then what Blackstone does really, really well is they'll scale that across other asset classes globally. They'll take those ideas and then they'll sort of fertilize them around the world depending on what makes sense from their perspective. So that's where the symbiotic relationship of helping each other out, I think, is coming big time.
I like the way you describe that. I mean, I think it's very important. There's this analogy of, do you want to be a mile wide and an inch deep, or an inch wide and a mile deep? They're both important.
They can be both with us.
Yes, well, I think we've gotten there in the end, but almost all these problems start with narrowing things down, right? We didn't start, like I said, with this incredible vision and ambition day one, and let's go spend, X million dollars to go make it happen. It started by trying to solve some very specific, very defined, narrow problems, and we built on it over time to get there. And I think you're right. I think the fact that we are, we were, to begin with, US-based, only industrial, it allows us to have that kind of focus, and that kind of being maniacal about our very, very narrow business allows you to build some things that might be much harder to build if you were trying to build them, say, for all asset classes all at one time.
Yep.
Being able to be narrow is a real advantage, and I recommend that to people along the way here. Is the potential is enormous, the options are almost infinite. You've got to narrow this down and really prioritize things.
Yeah.
Another measure of success in terms of the dashboards must be how many people in the business are using them. I know that Luke likes to refer to that, like George will provide the number, but you can tell that they're being used more and more throughout the business because people trust the information. Is that accurate to say?
100% accurate to say. I wish I had George's numbers, but they're extremely impressive. Tens of thousands of views per month. Almost everybody in the company is looking at one or more each month, if not each day. We maniacally keep track of the utilization of the dashboards to understand what people are looking at, what are they finding value in, and just as important, what maybe has kind of gotten stale over time and is not being looked at, so we can deprecate that. But we're using them to run our business, full stop.
Yeah.
Full stop.
And the success indicators for dashboards, there are several you can use. But one of the big ones is, it's the tree falls in the forest, right? If people aren't using the gosh darn thing, you have failed. You might have built the most incredible, there's all these different ways you can fail at the enterprise reporting process, right? I think where people most often fail is they build this incredible whiz-bang great dashboard. It either has wrong data in it, or it's too complicated, or more importantly, they haven't done the so-called dreaded words, change management. They haven't done the change management they need to do to say, you know what, I have this new resource property management for you to use. I think when we started this process, we oftentimes just sent out an email, said, ta-da, here's the new dashboard. And what you realize very quickly is people have to change the way they do their jobs. And they don't necessarily know how to do that from the get-go. You have to help them along the way. This gets back to your earlier questions. This is about doing things with people, not to people. So really, when we're doing dashboards today, unlike when we first started, when we're designing dashboards today for large numbers of users, we are sitting next to them, designing it with them, step by step. This whole idea of human-centered design is really, really important. What a finance person thinks is going to be usable to a property management person, that could be totally off, often is really off. And so the way you kind of avoid making those mistakes is to make sure that you're really doing this hand in glove with the end users.
I think that's important. We didn't talk about that, but the importance of the interface and the user experience of consuming the information through a dashboard. A mistake many companies will make is they'll just have, no offense, the finance people create this dashboard-like experience, but they don't have any sort of user experience design training, and they don't really know how to make it in a way that's repeatable and usable, and there's no context switching. We did take time up front to design our dashboards in a way where if you have a bar chart, it's used this way. If you have a pie chart, it's used this way. If you have the 6 key metrics, you're going to see them always at the top. If you're going to drill down in the tabs, the experience is going to traverse the same way every time, no matter if it's on the number 1 dashboard or the 50th dashboard in the list.
Yeah.
The colors are the same, the branding's the same, it's all the same. And I think that really makes it easy for the users to be able to adopt whatever it is we're throwing at them without them having to like relearn it every time. It just becomes intuitive.
And we've moved from that kind of basic standardization, coming up with this vernacular for the dashboard, which Clark and his team did, I think, really, really well, to now, taking it to another level where we really want people to be living in these tools day to day. You turn on your computer in the morning and a dashboard appears that, whether it's in Salesforce or in another venue, that allows you to do your job, then the design has to go up even another level, right? And we are talking about hiring our own, kind of UI experts to help us design these things even on another level. But that's an evolution that you can go through. You don't need to start with that, but you do need to start with some standardization and trying to really put yourself in the shoes of the people who are going to use this. Both what does it look like, how do you use the actual dashboard, and then that whole change management piece of, I'm going to give you this dashboard, now here's how I actually expect you to use it in your day-to-day. It's going to make your life better in these 4 ways. It's going to give them the why, it's going to make your life better, it's going to give us better information. All this stuff becomes really, really important in making sure you get that adoption. But to your point, we've gone through, we've learned the hard lessons along the way. Now we have, dozens and dozens of dashboards that are used thousands of times a week. Really, really well adopted. And I think, one of my goals starting out was to have our infrastructure built out well enough and our visualizations built out well enough that you actually hear people say, I can't leave Link. If I leave Link, I lose these 15 things, and I'm going back to my dreaded Excel spreadsheet all over again, right? I don't want to do that. That's a barrier to exit in some ways, and I think we're starting to get there for a number of these tools.
We were pretty prescriptive on where we felt it was important to own the intellectual property and the knowledge of building this infrastructure and running and managing it. So in the tech world, that's the question of, do you outsource it or do you hire people and make it a core competency? And from the beginning, we made data management, data engineering, analytics engineering, dashboard creation a core competency. It's full-time employees who work at Link. They're very well tenured, almost zero attrition to no attrition over time. And as a result, they understand our business. So when they sit down with anybody on the business side and they want to talk about creating something new or tweaking something, they understand the language, the terms, the logic, how it fits in. They know maybe you don't need to create something new. You can use this over here. We can just add a tab. And I think that's been a really, really big game changer. Same thing on your team, where we have the enterprise reporting function that you created ultimately. And they sit here on the floor together next to each other, and it's worked out really, really well. And I do believe, had we gone down a different path and tried to use a partner for that exclusively or outsource that function, it wouldn't have been successful.
Right.
And that takes conviction up front to say, Matt, I need 20 headcount. And you're like, what? Well, not all at once, but this is going to grow, and if it's successful, this is what it's going to take. And people know that's not a low-cost role right now in organizations. Data engineering, analytics engineering, probably the most hotly desired role to get, and so they command high salaries and high wages, and it's, in my opinion, worth every penny.
Yeah, I think that's one of the lessons along the way, which I think we knew it conceptually, but doing this requires an investment, right? If you try to do this with everyone in their existing roles and everyone just does a bit off the side of their desk,
Death.
I think you can succeed, but I think it's very narrow odds and it's very, very painful for everybody. For me as a CFO, it was being willing to say, okay, we're going to need X amount of capital, but we also have to have conviction that there's a return on this, right? And I think maybe it's worth talking about that a little bit. How do you justify this kind of investing, right?
What's the ROI?
What's the ROI, right? As the CFO, I'm always asking that question. And you can approach that from a lot of different angles. Each of the dashboards that we create, each of the projects we do along the way to allow all this to exist have ROIs associated with them, although they're hard to measure and we're never going to know with precision if we got them necessarily. But the way that I think about this at a very high level is, gosh, if I can get, a 10 basis point better return on the assets that I'm buying or selling, right? How many billions am I investing? What does 10 basis points represent of that? If I can lower my occupancy rate 20 basis points or 10 basis points, just because I have data that allows me to run my processes much more efficiently, know what's happening at each step in the process, right? If I know that I'm charging a slightly better rent or a slightly less low rent in some cases, or minimizing the turn time on a given unit, you can start to add these things up, and the potential rewards, the size of the prize is really enormous. But I think it's very important, if you're thinking about embarking on this exercise, to really pull back and put pen to paper and say, what do I think the art of the possible is here? And what is, what are the potential returns if I do that? If I'm successful, could I generate $1 million of profit? Can I generate 10, 50, 100, $1 billion? And what's the size investment that I'm thinking about, to kind of match that up with?
So we have conviction in the thesis that it's worth doing, obviously, because we did this and we're actually seeing benefit in our business. But it's more difficult to empirically tie a thread to any one of those metrics that Matt just said, and the data platform. We know it plays a role. We know it plays a part. Although I do think we've had good success in taking the research data, the predictive rent information, and looking at it historically and seeing where we landed versus where we could have landed had we not had those additional data points to drive our decisions in a certain direction.
Yeah.
So
You mentioned lessons learned. Maybe talk a little more about that, or talk about what would you do differently, like if you were starting over again with what you know now.
You
I
wanna
can
go
take a
first?
stab
Go
at a
ahead.
couple of those. Yeah. I mean, one is don't bite off more than you can chew. I talked about being narrow in this process, but if I think about some of the projects that we did, whether it was a tech implementation or reporting where we spent real money, and I would say we might have even wasted some money. We had a failed project that we had to do over again. It was simply because we were trying to do something before we were ready to do it, right? And I think when you start down this road, you're going to kind of, if my experience is any indication, or our experience is any indication, you're going to unlock the appetite for many, many people throughout the organization. And it's very exciting. You share the vision and people start to join it with you. Not everybody, but a big chunk. And they will naturally get very excited and very ambitious about this. And you, as senior management, with your tech experts and your seasoned professionals, need to be able to look at all these proposals coming in. One, fit them into a broader strategy. Make sure you're not just doing things willy-nilly. But more important, ask yourself the question: is this something we should be doing now, or do we need to wait for X, Y, and Z technology or process to mature so we can do it a year from now? We, as an organization, it's a kind of, I call it a high-class problem, but we have a hard time saying no sometimes, right? We want to go out there and try. We're entrepreneurial, we're curious, we want to take risks and do new things, and that comes sometimes with the cost of doing things a little too fast and maybe sometimes having to do them all over again. So that's one lesson I would quote. I've got a few others in my mind, but maybe you want to chime
Yeah, I'll
in.
throw one out. So business ownership,
Yes.
so business accountability.
Yeah.
I think at the beginning, our business partners felt like this was a service. And they ask for it and they get it. And we're like, no. If you want this, you own it.
own it.
What do you want?
You're
We're going to
in
do
it.
this together.
You're in it.
You're going to develop this with us, and
Right.
you're going to own it, and you're going to use it, and you're going to be carried along for the ride. And we learned that the hard way. We tried to be service-oriented, and then we kind of dinosaur arm business owners. No more of that. We have full ownership now, a single point of accountability for whatever it is we're going to build, and they build it with us in partnership. And that ends up paying off big time, because then it ends up with the change management and the adoption just happening because you have a embedded sponsor when the thing's ready to go out the door that cares about it, who fought for it, and who is now going to be part of getting it used. And that took a while for us to figure out, and that's still not easy. You still struggle finding those people who have the conviction
Yeah.
to deliver that. A lot of it kind of goes back to people have a lot of ideas, but the execution's the hard part.
Yeah.
Ideas are easy.
So we're like, okay, great idea, but sign up. Let's
Yeah.
go do it together. We're all in. But
It's
we're
that
all
spirit
in.
of partnership,
Yeah.
right? Where it's not just tech or data people who are doing this for you. You have to be, and I described it before, we sit down next to people and design these.
Yeah.
And that means that a senior person, say in property management, who's saying, I want this thing, is going to dedicate time of their people to help us design this the right way. It's not just something that they're going to say, I want that, and we come back with a silver platter. And I think as a preface maybe to your answer even, is the whole idea of projects, right? I mentioned before, this is about making an investment, about dedicating people. Learning what the difference is between what we call a big P project and a little p project, right? A little p project, sometimes we call that BAU, or business as usual improvements, where someone can do something they can tweak a process and make it better off the side of their desk, versus something that is going to require real dollar investment, real time investment, multiple department, multiple people. That's a big P project at our company. It's so-called bigger than a bread box. And we will deploy an actual project management team in our enterprise project management office to do those things. And you hire experts who help you design a project and point out where you're not doing things the right way, but they can't run the project, right? They can't run it by themselves. They need a business sponsor, a business owner to sit down next to them and really help them plan everything out and then go and do the work together.
So for our large P projects, we have 3 key roles. We have the business owner, we have the project manager or project director, and we'll have a technology owner. And those are that's a triumphant group of folks that need to work together and to make it happen, right? And to be aligned along the entire journey.
And if those 3 people do not click,
it's a bad
your
thing.
project is going to fail. And so figuring out how to make that work, it's again, we made a lot of mistakes along the way. These are a lot of humans involved in these processes, and people are complicated, and so we had to make some mistakes. We did have some projects we had to do over again, or that took much longer than we expected because we had to work out those dynamics and really understand what those roles were. Again, we were starting from not having done a lot of this, so we were really starting from scratch and had to make some mistakes as a result.
The pesky humans, once again, the pesky humans always.
Gotta
Great
love. You
problems.
can't live without them, but man, they can make things take a lot longer and be a lot harder. And I think for me, we say pesky humans. For me, I say that jokingly. One of the things that gets me up in the morning is that aspect of this, right?
course.
The challenge isn't just can we come up with this answer. It's all those steps along the way where to get to an answer that's going to be massively valuable to the business and then will actually be used in the business, you have to bring people along for the ride, explain to them why they're doing it, help them do this in a way that's easy for them, they can still do their day jobs. That human dimension is A, it's the difference between success and failure, and B, it's a really gratifying, when you start to learn how to do it the right way. The wrong way is not gratifying. The wrong way is pretty miserable. But once you start to realize how to do it the right way, it can be an incredibly gratifying part of all of these jobs.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely central to almost all the jobs. If you ignore the people, the whole thing won't work. Well, I guess we could come back to we talked about the humans. It's this whole issue of change management, right? Just finishing a dashboard and sending an email out to the whole world saying, here it is, please use it. That is not a recipe for success.
You build it,
right?
they will not necessarily come,
Right.
so to speak.
Right.
So yeah,
It's all these dimensions of dealing with the people in the process. I think that's the biggest mistake
Yeah.
we've made along the way.
And involving them in the process.
Involving them. They're partner. This is done in the spirit of partnership, doing things with people, not to people.
Yeah.
There's an infrastructure, not mistake, but learning along the way, where I talked about that vision of having a single enterprise data warehouse to feed the applications, as opposed to each application having their own database. We learned early on that, well, you don't take an enterprise data warehouse and have it do real-time access to data for an application. That's not the right architecture. You either need to have the information shared and synced, so it's close to the app and can be accessed quickly, or you do what we did, which is create an operational data store, which is sort of a sidecar copy of the data in a high-performant database that then serves the many custom applications from a single space. So that was a learning along the way that we tried to do it with just the enterprise warehouse, had to kind of go back to the well, redesign things because of the demands of the applications, needed a higher performant solution. And
Had
that
to
took
refine
us,
the architecture.
that took us about a year and a half to correct that and adjust it. And I just finished our last custom app, unhooking it from the warehouse and hooking it into the operational data store, which is something he never hears about me saying.
No.
But these things do happen behind the scenes.
I have no doubt.
Happy days in my
And I'm
role.
glad I know nothing about them. I think also just to get back to the human piece of this, it's one thing to teach people like how to use a tool a little bit better, but I think the whole topic of predictive analytics is something that we've also had a lot of, frankly, there's been some conflict around it, there's been resistance around it. It's different than, hey, you were using this tool, now use this tool. This is about, I have a subject matter expertise, I think I can predict the future, and maybe you were pretty good at it, but now you're telling me use this machine output to help do these things. And that conversation is really tricky, it's really challenging. I think the people's knee-jerk reaction is, oh, you're trying to use a machine to do what I do. You're
Right.
automating my insights, you're automating my predictions, my work. And it's really hard to convince people, and we've made a lot of mistakes in doing this, it's really hard to convince people that you're not saying use the machine instead. All we're saying is use the machine in addition.
Supplemental.
One plus one can equal 3.
Yeah.
You know, this is call it another objective voice in the room. It's to help you with your own thought process. We welcome conclusions that differ from what the machine tells you. We don't think the machine is necessarily right, but we equally think the humans are wrong all the time, right? We're all wrong. The machines are wrong, the humans are wrong. How about if we put these things together, can we come to a better answer? That is something that sounds really good when I'm saying it right now, but you have to approach that with the utmost of care. That whole partnership model, designing this, showing people where the heck do these predictions come from. Simply saying that rent is going to be $3 higher in 2 years, use it, that's not going to work. People say, well, how the heck are you coming up with that extra $2, that extra $3?
Right.
Creating, so not only is it hard, it's hard enough to create the predictive model, to create reporting on top of that that gives transparency to that model. It says, here's where all these assumptions are coming from, here's what we put in, you can question these 3 things, we can tweak it. It just makes the whole process that much more complicated. But without that process, we're learning, if you just give people a black box, they're going to refuse the black box. And rightly so.
In summary, the 2 mistakes that we made was the assumption that people will be receptive to this extra data point, informing them of how to do their job better.
Yeah.
Data point informational. The other assumption we made is that they would trust that data point, where it came from, and that the machine is logical in its thinking in its conclusion. Wrong on both fronts. In order to build credibility that they trust the information, to Matt's point, they need to understand how it was calculated, where it came from, show them the sausage making,
Yeah.
which we were thinking, I was like, who wants to see that?
Right.
They want to see it because they want to trust it and understand it. Then only after you do that can they actually use it and say, okay, this is going to help inform, but it's not like the answer.
And it is a long evolution.
It's really
Yeah.
strange, the human behavior sometimes. Because I was thinking, well, they're going to love this. Like, I'm going to cut time off their
Exactly
job.
right.
They're going to get this information in. They're going to be able to get to a price much more quickly with more conviction. And instead, it was, I'm not going to use that. I don't trust it. I don't know where it came from. I don't see the value of that. It's in my head. So there was that challenge. And then the other part was, okay, let's give them that. Let's let them look behind the curtain. So we had to kind of re-engineer things, literally upstream, so they could look behind the curtain. And I think we're in a better place now.
Yeah, we're getting there. I think we're hitting the reset. There are some core constituents at Link who I think theoretically could benefit from this, but really honestly, because of the way we approach the problem to begin with, by simply saying, here's the black box, it's better than you, use it, we alienated a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so we need to back up, do our mea culpas, hit the reset button, partner with those teams again, and really start from ground zero, start all over again.
And it's core to real estate, though, too. I mean, I think it's outside our industry as well, but it's even more pronounced in real estate. This is a relationship business.
Right.
This is a local business. And usually that's local people in local markets understanding what's happening on the ground, and that's the value they provide to the transaction space. And the relationships that they have with other people in the market where they get their information from. And then they have this little consortium of sharing information. And
So if they feel like you're saying to them, none of that's important.
Right.
Right,
That's
just
not
use
gonna work.
this.
And that's not
And
what
by
I
the
meant
way,
at all.
and
No.
if you're doing that, you're just wrong anyway, right? I mean, the reality is all these people are incredibly wise. They bring enormous amounts to the table. Again, we are not remotely trying to replace anybody. We're trying to empower people.
Yeah.
We're trying to give them better tools, help them use their incredibly unique and valuable brain that we can't replicate to make an even better decision than that. And we're not saying you made bad decisions before. We're saying we can do even better. We're just all trying to narrow that error. We're trying to narrow that cone of uncertainty.
Yeah.
Huge, I would say that's a huge learning in this process. That's getting into the world of predictive analytics, right? Getting people to say, I agree, that's the occupancy of the portfolio today. That's less of a change management exercise and more of a here's a tool to help you know that. But to actually go and use predictive analytics, and we're just starting to scratch the surface of this, that's a much bigger exercise.
Talk a little bit about Link's AI strategy.
Very good question. The cool part about, I guess the really impactful part about everything that we've talked about the last, 5 years of our work, puts Link in an extremely opportunistic position to take advantage of everything that you're seeing now coming out. So we carve AI into 3 types of artificial intelligence. We talked a lot about predictive learning, and predictive analytics, machine learning. We use that for rents and now valuations, and we're going to continue to lean into that. That's where we're going to spend most of our time and energy, insights and intelligence. But there's two other types, right? There's cognitive engagement, which is more of your ChatGPT and your Microsoft Copilots of the world, which took the world by storm in the fall of 2022. It's a way for humans to interact with intelligent machines in a different way, to consume information, to be able to write papers and summarize information. We do that at Link as well. We have chatbots on our websites, and we're going to continue to use that to optimize accessing this information. So now that we have everything organized in a very structured, system of truth-oriented kind of way, think about the power of, instead of going to a dashboard to navigate through, pick and click your answer, or to get your insight, you can just ask a question and get that presented to you in a credible way with a little green check mark that says this is validated by the Enterprise Link platform. And, oh, you need to have that in a table, we can kick it to a table. You need to kick it to a pie chart to put it in PowerPoint, it can do that as well. So again, we're just trying to make the friction of getting at the information easier. I mean, 3 years ago we were talking about not getting our business out of the business of building dashboards and creating insights through Excel and dashboards. We wanted to take that on for them. Now I want to get Link out of the business of creating dashboards at all, if I can. I don't know if that's going to be a nirvana state we get to, but people having to spend time hunting and looking through different user interfaces to get their information, I think is going to be the next frontier for us. And because the way we've designed everything, the maturity we have around our data governance, it's going to really be an accelerator for us. The last part is robotic process automations. That's the third type of AI. Doesn't really relate to the data space so much. It's more about how you manage your processes, and you can automate your processes. We're going to do that too. But in real estate, if you think about it, it's a very scalable business. You can have few humans manage mass quantities of assets, right? So we don't save our way to success at Link. Like a company that might have 1 million employees, we have 1,000 employees. But we do want to run our business as efficiently as possible, so we'll be looking at opportunities to do that too. Anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say that AI is just another step along this journey, right? It's those 3 different applications, whether it's creating Link GPT or creating better predictive analytics or automating our business, they all need to start at the same place that we started at the beginning of this episode, right? Which is, can you answer basic questions? Can you get all of your data in one place with definitions that everyone agrees to and a way of making sure that the quality is there? Every CFO out there, every CTO, they're all going to be pitched with these incredible, here's a great AI application here, here's another thing you can do over there, all these new custom applications you can buy off the shelf. None of them are going to work for your business if you don't start at the beginning and have your data in the right place.
Because at the core, AI is a large language machine learning model. It needs to understand your business. It needs to understand your data glossary, what those definitions are. It needs to understand how that translates to the information in a structured database, and you need to train it on all of that. So imagine a company that doesn't have that design done, doesn't have its glossary defined, has 100 databases with information scattered everywhere. That's a exponentially more challenging problem than I think where we're at in our position to be able to take advantage of this going forward. So I'm super excited about it. We're being very thoughtful about it because it's a bit of a nuclear arms race going on right now. It's got to be careful that you don't overcapitalize something on a bad idea, but I think we're approaching it the right way.
Yeah, and if you're at the beginning stage of this journey and someone's pitching you on something, my message to you is, do you have good data?
Yeah.
Is it all in one place? And if the answer to either of those questions is no, just ignore all the pitches you're being given, right? It's really about starting at that very, very beginning step. And I think people kind of naturally ignore that. It's not sexy. It's certainly a lot of the time not fun. It's expensive, difficult.
Dirty job.
It's a dirty job. You have to reverse engineer a bunch of stuff you've already done as a company, but you've got to start there or all the newfangled, exciting stuff just isn't going to work.
So it sounds like Link is maybe at adolescent stage. What does full maturity look like in terms of our data program?
Ooh, I love that question.
Boy, go ahead.
I would say...
He's a robot, and he doesn't...
I have a colleague here who once said that if AI were a thing in the future and they were going to that AI was going to send a human back into the past to pave the way for evil AI to take over, it would be me. I don't think that person meant it as a compliment, but I definitely took it as a compliment. No, I mean, look, I think that for us, it is a few different things. One, it's the integration of predictive analytics into many more parts of our business where we develop that capability, right? It's not what things can we predict, it's what predictive analytics can we learn to use appropriately in the business,
Yeah.
right? And so it's not just one or two areas we're doing that across, whether it's predicting, as I said earlier, when a building is going to break or predicting when a customer is going to leave. These are all things that require more and more data. In fact, in many of them, more data than we have today. They're questions we're trying to answer and we're trying to go fill those data gaps. But not only being able to answer the questions with predictive analytics, but being able to get people to use those in a very natural, kind of fluent way, I think is a really, really important thing. And then maybe going from that, which is the kind of very advanced, very expensive, and I think very aspirational, to much more simple things. Can we run this business like a traditional modern real estate, like a traditional corporation, right? Where we know all the things that we do all day long, and we can see where people are doing their processes on a platform like Salesforce, using our data platform. We can look at each thing that everyone is doing and saying, are we doing this the right way?
Right.
Oh, look, there's a hotspot there. We could generate another $10 million of revenue if we fix that process. But as of today, many of these processes are just being done on email. They're back and forth, and we have no idea without going and painstakingly harvesting manual data from people's computers. We have no way of knowing where things really aren't working in a lot of cases. So I think there's $50, $100, $200 million of NOI that we could probably generate if we really get down to a science, implement these workflow processes and platforms the right way, and really start using the conclusions they can allow us to generate.
I think that's right. We've done a really good job of creating that digital twin of our assets and our financials and our leasing and those 4 domains I talked about. If we can do the same thing for our processes and all the key milestone points along the journey of everybody's role at Link and how we're servicing our customers and managing those assets, and get the exhaust of that in real time to make decisions on how to tweak that or move things faster or slow them down, I mean, then the thing's just like this breathing heartbeat that we actually can see. It's almost like looking at the matrix, but being able to make sense of it and make decisions in real time to tweak it, just like we've been aspirationally trying to do with managing the assets day to day. We want to manage the processes like that.
And the good news is we have a huge upfront investment that we made that everyone's going to have to make to some degree, smaller, lesser, but you have to make that upfront investment. And all these things are expensive. Incrementally, they do cost more money, but those costs go down once you have that kind of installed foundation.
Right.
And so just leveraging it a little bit more, the ROI on these things starts to get really, really attractive as you kind of, have that installed base.
Well, excellent. Gentlemen, thank you for the conversation.
A lot.
You've got the 101 course on data now, John. So.
You're ready for your CTO time.
I'm ready.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.